Okay, we go back to our biography series. Um, so far, I think we've done Rebbetzin Kanievsky, we did Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, we did Rabbi Hifter, and today we're going to do a biography that it's a little bit different than the ones we do in the past, because what I want to talk about directly relates to the survival of American Jewry and to the person who, at least in the Torah observant world, in the yeshiva world, I don't like the word Haredi. It's a relatively new term. When I was a kid, the term didn't exist. What it literally means is it refers to someone who has reverence, who fears Hashem. It comes from Chored Lidvar Hashem. So first of all, what? If you have somebody who's not part of that world and he's part of the modern Orthodox world, he can't be someone who has reverence for the fear of Hashem, right? So that's number one. And also the term ultra Orthodox, so I'm not exactly sure what that means. So somebody who finds who follows halacha is Orthodox, because that's what it means. Orthodox means the older tradition. So what does ultra mean? I don't know. So like in many things, I don't like terms. I don't like being labeled with it. But sometimes just to define it, to know who we're speaking about, I'm not going to use those terms. I'm going to use the term the yeshiva world. Okay. That the person we're going to speak about today is responsible, in my opinion, and in many people's opinion, for the survival and the rebuilding of the Torah world in the United States, and to some extent, as we will see, in Eretz Yisrael as well. We're going to talk about Rabbi Aaron Kotler, Kotler. Aaron Kotler. He was born in Sislovich in Belarus, or in Minsk, which is in Belarus, in 1892. I'm going to give you a very brief, just a small biographical sketch, just in terms of where he lived and what he did. And then we'll talk a little bit about some of his accomplishments and what it means to our world today. We'll also tell you some stories, if we get there, about President Truman and Henry Morgenthau, and we'll see if we get there. Okay, so as a young boy, he was orphaned already as a young boy. He was like in the early 1900s, maybe 10 to 12 years old, something like that. He was already orphaned. And at age 14, and he was already known, even though he was such a young boy, he was already known as a tremendous genius. He was a tremendous Ilui. Ilui means a genius. We say the Vilna the Gaon. The Gaon doesn't mean a genius. The Gaon means an absolutely great sage. They use it as a synonym for Ilui, but Ilui really is more of a correct word for a genius. He was known as a tremendous Ilui, and already when he was 14, he went to the great Slutsk Yeshiva. And do you know where the Slutsk Yeshiva was located? In Slobodka, that's right. Slobodka was, it was actually, there was the capital of Lithuania. Anybody know what the capital of Lithuania is?
Vilna.
It was actually Kovna. I believe so. And there was a small bridge that was between, Slobodka was very, very close to Kovna. You could walk from one to the other over a bridge. The problem was that there were many times of the year when the bridge was frozen, it was difficult to go over. When the bridge wasn't frozen, oftentimes the mud that came there made it impossible to cross. So it wasn't always easy. At many times of the year, it wasn't easy to cross from one to the other. But Slobodka, I don't know what year it was opened, but it was opened by Rabbi Nosson Tzvi Finkel, who was the great uncle of the great Rabbi Nosson Tzvi Finkel, who was the leader of the Mir Yeshiva, who passed away about 15 years ago. And it was at its time, in its prime, it was considered probably in Lithuania the yeshiva that produced the most leaders and world leaders than any other yeshiva. It's fair to say that it produced almost all of the great Torah leaders that led American Jewry. Many of them went to Eretz Yisrael as well. But Rabbi Hutner and Rabbi Ruderman and Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky and Rabbi Aaron Kotler, many of them came from Slobodka. He went there, and then in 1911, when he was 19 years old, he left the Slobodka Yeshiva, and he went to the yeshiva in a town called Slutsk. And there, 3 years later, he married the Rosh Yeshiva's daughter. Now, I know these names don't mean, the names of the cities may not mean a lot to you, the name of the rabbis may not mean much to you, but he married another great sage. The Rosh Yeshiva was Rabbi Isser Zalman Meltzer, and he was the head of the yeshiva in Slutsk. And then 3 years later, in 1921, or 2 years later, the yeshiva moved to Kletsk. So the head of the yeshiva of Kletsk was now Rabbi Isser Zalman Meltzer. His son-in-law, Rabbi Aaron Kotler, who we're speaking about today, he taught in the yeshiva as well. He wasn't the Rosh Yeshiva, but he taught in the yeshiva. And in 1924, his father-in-law moved to Eretz Yisrael. In 1924, Rabbi Isser Zalman Meltzer moved to Eretz Yisrael, and he lived until the end of 1953. So he was there almost 30 years. I'll tell you a side story about Rabbi Isser Zalman Meltzer. I didn't bring pictures. I would have brought pictures. We have a lot of pictures of these people. Rabbi Isser Zalman Meltzer, when he was courting a young woman, he had a reputation wherever he was learning. My guess is he was learning in Slobodka, but I'm not sure. He had a reputation as also a great, great sage and also a tzaddik. There's so many stories of Rabbi Isser Zalman and his great midos, his great character. And but he wasn't healthy. He was sort of a weak young man. And this young girl wanted to marry a Talmid Chacham. She wanted to marry a really, really serious Torah scholar. And here she had the opportunity to marry Rabbi Isser Zalman Meltzer. Her family didn't want her to, because her family said, he's weak, he doesn't have a good constitution. You know, we want you to live a long life with a husband. We don't. So she didn't know what to do. On the one hand, she really wanted to marry him. On the other hand, her family didn't want to. So she and her husband went to the Chofetz Chaim to ask for his advice. And they came to the Chofetz Chaim and they told him the story. And the Chofetz Chaim said, I'm going to say it in Yiddish first. Se da gesunde Menschen und se da Menschen was leben lang. There are people who are healthy and there are people who live long lives. Don't worry. And she married him. And he lived to be 84 years old. Today, it's not young anymore. It's not old anymore. But back in the 1940s and 50s, in the 1940s and 50s, that was not. It was way above the average age that a person lived. So in 1924, when his father-in-law went to Eretz Yisrael, he took over as the Rosh Yeshiva of Kletsk. He was known, even till his death, but certainly till he left Europe, as the Kletzker Rosh Yeshiva. And he was such a fiery genius and such an incredible teacher of Torah that he became known as the Rosh Yeshiva in Europe. Okay, so Rabbi Aaron Kotler was the Rosh Yeshiva in Europe. I want to tell you a little story about how Rabbi Aaron Kotler made it to Slobodka. Interesting thing. In the 1950s, there's a rabbi in he's been here a few times to Denver. He's spoken for the Kollel here a few times. His name is Rabbi Ephraim Shapiro. I don't remember his father's name, but he was Rabbi Shapiro. He was a rabbi in Miami. And in the 1950s, with almost no Americans studying in Israel, he was studying in Israel. And one day it was Erev Shabbos, it was a Friday afternoon, and he sees a little kiosk that sold cigarettes and drinks, and it was a Friday afternoon. The dangers of smoking were not known then. A lot of the yeshiva brachim used to smoke. Some things haven't changed so much, but it's changed a lot, Baruch Hashem, but it's not what it used to be by any means. But unfortunately, still too many smoke. Well, I don't see so many in America that smoke. Anyway, and this Rabbi Shapiro, who is not yet Rabbi Shapiro, hi Gary, he walked over to the kiosk And he wanted to know if he could buy before Shabbos, if he could buy some drinks, some cookies, maybe some cigarettes, not for Shabbos, right? That he could buy. And the fellow said, nope, my shop is closed. Friday afternoon after 1, he was sitting there studying. He said, my shop is closed. That's it. I don't sell. It's too late. I close earlier of Shabbos, and I'm studying here. I'm getting ready for Shabbos. So as he was talking with this young, well, we'll call him Rabbi Shapiro because I don't know his first name. As he was talking to him, he said, "Where are you from?" So he said, I'm from America." And I think what he said, that he was studying, and he now came to study there as Israel. So he said, "America." He said, "I heard that there might be somebody in America who I know." He said, Aaron Sislevitzer, whose name he was known by in Europe. He was known by his name was Pinus, Pines. I don't know how it got changed to Kotler. I don't know the story how it went there. But as a young man, he was known as either Aaron Sislevitzer. You hear names of yeshiva students back then. Many of them were known, especially if they were at the top level, by the name of the city that they came from. So he says to him, somebody by the name as Aaron Sislevitzer. He says, "Do I know him?" He says, "He's the Rosh Yeshiva of the Lakewood Yeshiva. He founded the Lakewood Yeshiva. It's called BMG, Beis Medrash Gadol. Is here it's called in Denver. It's called BMH, Beis Medrash HaGadol. It's BMG, Beis Medrash Gadol. Beis Medrash Gavoa. Sorry, Beis Medrash Gavoa means it was a high level yeshiva. Beis Medrash Gavoa. Sorry, not BMG. That's how it's got BMG. So he said, and he started to tell him, Aaron, I mean, he's famous around the world. He's one of the greatest scholars. He's the Rosh Yeshiva of the generation." And the man smiled. He said, "Really? Let me tell you a story," because he didn't know what had happened to him. So he said that I used to be a butcher in Minsk. And every time I made a sale, or at the end of every day, he said, I took a coin or two and I would put it in the jar. And I would save up the money. And when there was enough money saved up, I think he said, I went to speak to the Rav of the town. I could be getting this part mixed up. And I said, there might be yeshiva students here, young boys, who can't afford to go to yeshiva, and they want to go to a big yeshiva somewhere else, to a great yeshiva. Maybe they can't afford. Do you know of anybody? He said, there were 2 boys who I sent away. One was Aaron Sislevitzer, Aaron Kotler, and the other one was Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, who's I think called Yaakov Minsker. And this Rabbi Epstein looked at him like, "You are responsible for Rabbi Kotler and Rabbi Kamenetsky going to Slutsk Yeshiva? You saved American Jewry. This butcher who's now running a little kiosk in Tel Aviv, he saved American Jewry." So you don't know. Sometimes a little act you think you do, tzedakah here, tzedakah there, you support a student in yeshiva, you support a kol man learning. Aside from the mitzvah itself, that you're supporting Torah, you're supporting somebody learning, the idea, you don't know what you're creating. This butcher put aside a little bit from his, meager income, and he wound up sending Aaron Kotler and Yaakov Kamenetsky to yeshiva. It happened to be they were second cousins. No, that's Rav Ruderman and Rav Kamenetsky. Sorry. To somebody in the yeshiva world, that's mind-boggling to think that one person saving his pennies could have been responsible for that. He came to visit the United States in 1935. He may have come one other time, and what he saw was that there was the situation in the United States in terms of Torah observance and in terms of Torah learning was terrible is a word, but it was dying, it was gone. It had never been alive in America. So to say it was dying, it was like, look, Jews came from Russia, over 1 million Jews to the United States. They come from other countries, right? And the life there under the Tsar and wherever they lived was a terrible, terrible life. I'm talking about before World War II. I heard Rabbi Wein, and by the way, if you don't know, we're doing tonight we're doing a eulogy here for Rabbi Beryl Wein at 6:40 till 7:25, a 45-minute eulogy. I'll be speaking, and then Rabbi Hill Goldberg will be speaking. And if you can't make it, there's a Zoom link. I think actually those of you who are watching on, I think it's the same Zoom link as you're watching now. Thanks, Joe. Anyway, the situation in America was such that it was like unfathomable that, as Rabbi Wein used to explain, he said the Jews lived under the Tsar. It was a terrible, terrible situation, and the Tsar had planned. I mean, Stalin wanted to kill all the Jews, and just before he put his plan into place to get rid of all the Jews, he died on Purim 1952. Okay, thank you. And the Tsar also had, and it was known, the Tsar had a plan for the Jews. He was going to send a third out, a third should leave, a third he would kill, and a third he would send to Siberia. That was his plan, basically, of getting rid of the Jews from Russia. God had other plans, yeah, and it didn't turn out the way he wanted to, although we know what happened, unfortunately, to Russian Jewry. So they came to America, not only from Russia, from other places in Europe as well, and life had been terrible and miserable for them over there. When they came to America, there were two things. Some, they say, the stories go, they said, enough with our Yiddishkeit, we're going to the land. They from what they really believed, like the streets were paved with gold, right? It was called the Golden Medina. We're going to come to America. We're going to try to make a living. Anything that gets in the way. So those Jews just gave everything up. There were a handful, very few Jews who actually stuck to keeping Torah mitzvahs. And then there were other Jews who had been observant in wherever they came from, but they came to America and they said, it's impossible to keep Shabbos here in America. Because in those days it was a 6-day work week, and Saturday wasn't the day off, right? It was a Sunday. Then eventually it became a 5-day work week. There's a joke in Israel, about once, I don't know who, they asked one of the prime ministers, when are we going to go to a 5-day work week? So he said, well, first we have to get to a 4-day work week. Then we'll want to worry about working our way up to 5. In any case, the situation was terrible. Now, there was a yeshiva Torah Vadas that existed. By the mid-1930s, there may have been a yeshiva Chaim Berlin. There was a small yeshiva called Chavetz Chaim that had already started. Maybe there was one or two others, but they were very small, right? There were a relatively small number of students. Secondly, in Europe, the Yeshiva University, of course, was there. And Rabbi but that started in the 40s. Yeah. That started in the 40s, right? And a few things. First of all, that in Europe there was no such thing as secular studies. Anybody who wanted to learn a craft, he would go to a tradesman and learn a craft. If you wanted to be a professional, so individuals learned to be professionals. But in the yeshivas, there was no such thing. It was Torah and Torah and Torah. And then the people would get livings, would make livings, would be getting other jobs, and some of them sacrificed for it. In America, there was no such thing. Even in the good yeshivas, and there were some great people in the good yeshivas, the time was limited because at that day, the American dream was to send your kid to college. And most Americans, I have to send my kid to college. It became like a joke that it was a Jewish thing to do, but it wasn't always like that, right? And we know that college is the cesspool of ideas, and what's happened in America to kids that went to college. So, but regardless of that, the level of Torah learning in America was at a low standard, and there were not many who were. Rabbi Aaron came in 1935. And Rabbi Aaron Kotler, and he saw this, but he went back to Europe, and obviously this was already cooking on his mind, what was going on. In 1940, he went with his yeshiva to Vilna. Now, in 1940, in Vilna, there was a time where, by God's grace, the Germans had not yet entered, and the Russians, for a short time, had given Lithuania back its independence. I don't even know if they gave the whole Lithuania back. I think they gave Vilna back its independence. I don't remember the history behind it. And what happened was Chaim Ozer Gudzinski, who was the rabbi of Vilna, and he was considered the Gadol Hador, the great the great giant, Torah giant of the generation. He wasn't the Rosh Yeshiva, but it was a Rab, and the stories about him are amazing, maybe for another time. He encouraged all the yeshivas to come to Vilna, because elsewhere in Lithuania, elsewhere in Russia, the Jews didn't have a chance anymore. Of course, in Germany, they didn't have a chance. I don't know how many yeshivas were left in Germany. Anyway, everybody had to come to Vilna. What's going to happen? We'll figure it out. But in the meantime, they had a safe haven in Vilna. Rabbi Aaron came, smaller yeshivas came, bigger yeshivas came. Again, the entire student body of all the yeshivas in Lithuania wasn't that great, but they all came to Vilna. Eventually, Russia took it back over, and then the Germans invaded, and they were all killed out. But there were many students who were also killed, but there were many who managed to escape from Vilna and make it to the United States. The famous survival of the Mir Yeshiva was because they came to Vilna, and they were able to make it to Curacao, and from Curacao they were made to Japan, and from there to Shanghai. And that was the survival of the Mir Yeshiva, which is one of the great miracles of Jewish history. Today, the Mir Yeshiva has 9,000. Back then, there were actually 400 during the time of the war. Okay, so Reb Aaron went to Vilna, but eventually he escaped Vilna, and in 1941 he had a decision to make. Am I going to go to Eretz Yisrael, where my father-in-law is, and where the Torah world was also suffering terribly? I know there was a small yeshiva, Eitz Chaim, and in the old yeshuv, in the old settlements of Yerushalayim, there were still some very strong pockets of Jews. Remember, there weren't that many Jews there at the time. There were a few 100,000 Jews, and out of those, many of them were chalutzim, and they were not Torah observant Jews. Tel Aviv had some. There was some in other places, but are small. But should he go to Eretz Yisrael, or should he go to America? And this was a very, very difficult decision for Aaron to make. And he made the decision that he's going to come to America. And even though there were some great rabbis in America, Reb Aaron saw and he felt that in Eretz Yisrael, there weren't only great Torah leaders, but there were people who were builders and who would build Eretz Yisrael and the Torah world in Eretz Yisrael as well. In America, he didn't feel there was enough. And Reb Aaron also said that the next frontier for Torah Jewry, the only place Jews can go is America. Right? Remember, this is before the state. Even at the beginning of the state, there were only a small number of yeshivas, but he felt we have a tradition from Reb Chaim Volozhin, who was the primary disciple of the Gaon of Vilna, and he was called the father of the yeshiva world because in 1803, his name was Reb Chaim Rabinowitz. In 1803, he opened a yeshiva in Volozhin. It became one of the outstanding yeshiva. It closed down in 1899 because of the Russian government, but they were open from like 1803 to 1899, and they produced the greatest scholars amongst the Jewish people. This was not the Hasidic world. Remember, this is the Lithuanian Torah world, which was focused for centuries on Torah study. They had a reputation of being very stoic. There was a tremendous amount of chesed, but equal to the amount of chesed, there was a tremendous amount of poverty in Lithuania. Many Lithuanian Jews escaped and they went to South Africa, but this was already before World War II. Rabbi Aaron felt that he heard from Reb Chaim Volozhin that Reb Chaim Volozhin, who opened the first yeshiva, there was a tradition from Reb Chaim Volozhiner, who's called the father of all yeshivas, that the last refuge of the Torah world before Mashiach comes is going to be the United States. Now, this was in the early 1800s. Yeah. Right? There's no such thing as a yeshiva in the United States. How he knew and how he saw this, I don't know. But that was the tradition in the yeshiva world, that the last refuge before Mashiach comes for Torah in the world is going to be the United States of America. So maybe because of that, maybe because of the situation here, in 1941, Reb Aaron decided he was going to come to the United States. In 1943, he opened up the Lakewood Yeshiva with 15 students. Now, today Lakewood has over 10,000. Right? I looked, just Wikipedia doesn't have much about him, but I don't think I have the paper here. Oh, By 29, as of 2011, it was run by his grandson, Aaron Kotler, who is the Rosh Yeshiva today, along with 3 of his brothers-in-law. After Rabbi Aaron died in 1962, his son Rav Shner took over. By 2019, the yeshiva had grown into the largest institution of its kind in the United States. Interesting, Wikipedia has with 6,715 students. Okay, I don't think these numbers are right, and I have a reason for believing that, but 2,748 regular students, that means yeshiva bachrim, and 3,967 in the kollel, which means full-time learners. Kollel means they're married. That was in 2019. We're 6 years from that now. So let's see, 4,000. We're approximately 6,600 based on these numbers. We're 6 years later, there are over 10,000 in the yeshiva now. Even in the last 6 years, it's just exploded. Another thing over here, it says here, while the surrounding Lakewood community supports a network of more than 100 other yeshivas, they also mean like lower from high school on. That number of 100 probably has grown minimally by 50%, in the last 6 years. Like they're opening up new boys' schools and girls' schools. There's a cheder there with 3,000 students. Some of you may remember I had an associate rabbi from 2008 to 2010, Rabbi Stern. Remember Rabbi Stern? You were here. Rabbi Stern, remember with the red beard, the fiery red beard? Okay. He is the executive director of a school.
He was a great teacher.
Yeah.
He was a great teacher, Rabbi.
So even since and it says here, it has approximately 200 synagogues. I remember when I was saying Kaddish for my father in 2015 to the middle of 2016, I tried to catch a minyan wherever I went. On Lakewood, there's no problem with a minyan, except that I had to leave on a plane in the early afternoon, and it wasn't so easy to find a minyan at that time of day. Anyway, there's a website called godaven.com. You put in the zip code where you are, and it shows you. It's amazing. Not everybody's registered, but it shows you minyanim that are in that neighborhood. At that time, this was, and not everybody's registered. In 2015, 2016, I found 147 places that daven mincha in Lakewood, and many of them had multiple minyanim. Today, I tell you that for sure the number has increased by 40, 50%. There's just been an explosion. It says here the Orthodox population is estimated at more than 66,000. It's now well over 100,000 in 2025. So what's happened in Lakewood, Rabbi Aaron couldn't have dreamed. But what he did was when he opened his yeshiva, he did it in the resort town. Lakewood at that time was a resort town. Not anymore. You go there today, it's no longer. But his idea was get away from the city, let the students study without interruption, without all the disturbances of a city. So in the summer, they'll see the tourists that come that want to be not far from the ocean. They want a sort of a countryside place, but that changed a lot from the 1940s. In 1948, I'll tell you in a moment how that happened, but in 1948, Rabbi Aaron, that's how he was affectionately known, people were like Kotler in the yeshiva world. When somebody says Rabbi Aaron, generally we know who we're talking about. We're talking about Rabbi Aaron Kotler. He was there during the War of Independence, and he was in Yerushalayim when it was being bombed by the Jordanians. And there was one especially heavy bombing, and he was lying on the floor with other people, and his life was in jeopardy with the other people. Probably didn't have a shelter, with other people on the floor, wherever they were. Maybe they were in a shelter, I don't know. And he was heard to be saying, he had a very heavy Lithuanian. I've only heard 1 or 2 recordings of it, but very difficult to understand if you don't understand a real Lithuanian Yiddish. He said, Rebbeinu Shalom, the master of the world, I still have so much work to do, to accomplish in this world. Please let me live. He said, I have so much still to accomplish in your world, So he said, God heard him, and he survived. And what he accomplished between 1941, when he got there, and his death in 1942 is absolutely astounding. So I want to read to you a couple of things over here. He arrived in 1941 in the United States, and he had an impromptu press conference. As I said, in America at the time, the number of Shabbos observant Jews was very few. The number of students in yeshiva and the yeshiva levels were not very high at the time. Was small. I recently heard, I think it came from Rabbi Wein, but I'm not sure, that Rabbi Yosef Ber Soloveitchik, who was the head of the yeshiva in Yeshiva University, right, Yeshiva Rabbi Yitzchak Hanan, said because the effect of Aaron had on the Torah world was so phenomenal that Rabbi Soloveitchik said in the 60s or 70s that Rabbi Aaron's coming to America has brought the level of scholarship in my yeshiva up much higher, because the students, the bar had been raised by that time to such an extent that it even affected the students who were coming to Yeshiva University, so that the level of study there, and they had great people at Yeshiva University who were leaders, but they didn't feel that the American boys can handle it. But by the 1970s, that had already changed. So maybe everything proportionately, but Rabbi Soloveitchik said that because of Aaron, the study in my yeshiva has been brought to another level. I've told you the story about the pink slips, about the man who decorated his sukkah with pink slips. No other decorations. He just had slips that said he was fired. And when his children asked him, his grandchildren asked, what kind of decoration is this? When I came to America, I found a job. Every Friday I was fired because they told me, if you can't, famous words, we know this in America, if you can't come back on Monday, don't bother coming back. That's it. Right? And people couldn't find jobs because of that. I don't want to say a handful, but the very few Shomer Shabbos. If you're not going to come in Saturday, right? Yeah. Thank you. If you're not going to come in Saturday, don't bother coming in Monday. That was the way. So he had so many pink slips where he worked for 5 days and then he was fired, or 6 days and he was fired. He kept them, and then he put them up as a sukkah decorations. But God rewarded this man. I don't remember his name, but Pesach Kron tells a story because he had children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren who were all committed and loyal to Torah, Shabbos observant Jews, because he sacrificed. And there were a few, but Shabbos was very, very difficult. Rabbi Wein, it's like, it's so sidetracked because so many things pop into my head as I talk about this. Rabbi Wein said he remembers that his father's shul in Chicago, he remembers as a young boy, they had an early minyan on Shabbos morning, like 7 o'clock. By the time he came with his father to shul for the 9 o'clock minyan, he saw 700 people herding out of shul, and like there was a much smaller minyan at 9 o'clock. And Rabbi Wein turned to his father. He was 11, 12 years old, and said, "Daddy, where are all these people going?" And he said, don't ask too much. No, don't ask them. This little boy, he said, as I got into my teens and as I got older, I realized what was going on was that all these people were going to work. They wanted to be Jews. They wanted to keep, so they kept in shul. So they came to daven on Shabbos morning, but they all went to work afterwards. And Rabbi Wein used to say, and then the next generation, they didn't go to shul, and the fathers, they didn't want to wake them up on Shabbos. They go to work. So he said they used to kick their kids just to make sure that they were awake, and then the kids would go to work. So the generations, right, they descended, and they fell further and further apart. So that was the state of American Jewry. When Rabbi Aaron came in 1941, he gave a press conference, an impromptu press conference, and this is what he said. Now, whether this is a quote from the newspaper, I don't know, but these are in quotes. He said, "For myself, I would not have come. I came in order to try, with your help, I came to help the Jews of America to rescue the long-established Torah centers that have existed for hundreds of years, for Torah has a future in America." And remember, in 1941, basically all the great yeshivas in Lithuania were already destroyed. Poland, many of them. Hungary, not yet. But the level of learning in Hungary was nowhere near at that time the level of learning in Lithuania. And I guess if you ask the Hungarians, they would tell you differently, but I'm not Lithuanian, so I'm an objective observer. Rabbi Aaron then mentioned the obligation to do everything possible to save the Jews of Europe. Meaning there already was the Reform movement had Stephen Wise, who was their main rabbi, who, well, no, I don't have to say about him. He tried also to save Jews, but there was a Vad Hatzalah. There was a Vad Hatzalah, which means a committee for rescue that in America, that once Rabbi Aaron came, he said we have to do everything we can, and he raised the level of the Vad Hatzalah and the intensity of the work to save Jews from Europe. I will tell you one story about Stephen Wise, and this, to say irked, is like, it would be a silly word. Eichmann, Yamach Shemo v'zichro, may his name be eradicated. He needed trucks. He needed weaponry. He offered to give 1 million Jews at $75 per head. Now, $75 million was a lot of money. And the United States, of course, you couldn't do it legally because the United States, are they going to save the Jews? But you're going to give the Nazis $75 million. But Rabbi Aaron and the Vadat Sola said, we have to do everything we can. This deal was worked out by Rabbi Michael Ber Weizmantel, who had come from Nitra, which probably wasn't Hungary. He survived the war. He actually escaped from Auschwitz. He went back. He survived. He had a yeshiva in Mount Kisco. He died. He opened the yeshiva in Mount Kisco, New York. Rabbi Michael Ber Weizmantel. He sent the United States government maps of Auschwitz and how to get and where exactly to bomb. And the United States would not bomb the railways, which would have stopped the cattle cars from coming. They wouldn't. Well, that's later on. They wouldn't bomb. So Stephen Wise said, "We cannot do this. We cannot save the Jews at the expense of giving the Nazis money." And he refused to pay money, and it was a big battle. All the Orthodox rabbis, the Rosh Yeshiva, were fighting their heads off. But eventually, the plan fell through because they couldn't come through with big monies. But Eichmann had actually offered 1 million Jews at $75 per head. Okay, so he says, we have to do everything possible to save the Jews of Europe. And this is another quote. I hope that you will neither rest nor remain silent, even momentarily, until they have all been saved. Today, America is the last and only resort for rescue from the Valley of Tears. All other doors are closed. He tells the Jews of America, see to it that the path to America, the only escape route, is widened, that America should admit the largest possible number of Jews. Now, you have to recognize the implications of his words. He had just come from a train after a long and wearying journey. He had traumatic events in Europe. He himself faced great dangers. The yeshivas were destroyed. I mean, he could have been a broken man. He had no hometown yet. He had nowhere to live yet. But he was not concerned with himself. As soon as he came there and finding a place to live, he immediately dove into saving Europe's Jews and working with the Vadat Sola and with the goal of creating authentic Torah centers in the United States. It didn't matter whether he slept, didn't matter whether he had a place to live. If he was in the office and he had to sleep in a chair, so be it. His one son, Reb Shneir, who became Rosh Yeshiva in 1962, after 1962 to 1982, after his father died. Reb Shneir was in Israel with his grandfather, Reb Isha Zalman Meltzer. He had gotten out of Europe and he was studying in Yeshiva and he couldn't make it to America. He stayed there for many years. He was there during the entire war. So Reb Aaron breathed new life into the Vadat Sola and he became the organization's chairman. And Rabbi Eliezer Silver, one of the great rabbis in America, he was in Cincinnati, Ohio. He was in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania first. These great people couldn't find positions. They went to these little cities where they had a few hundred Jews, and they took positions there. But the story goes, I cannot tell you if the story is true, but the story goes, again, Rabbi Wein used to say all the time about his own stories. He said, all my stories are true, some just haven't happened yet. Right? He used to say, right? But to explain that, he would say that stories depict an era. Stories depict a person. Stories depict a situation. The story goes that when he became a rabbi in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, Rabbi Eliezer Silver was a tremendous scholar. And he in Harrisburg, he didn't have any peers to study with. He used to spend his nights at home throughout the night, studying every night. And one night, they say that some of his lay people from the synagogue who didn't know much were passing by and they saw him studying late into the night. And they said, Meshul, we need a rabbi who's still studying. We want a rabbi who already knows everything. Right? They fired him. That's the story. And it's an old story about Rabbi Eliezer Silver, right? And they fired him. So eventually he became rabbi in Cincinnati. My mother-in-law, Elah Shalom, Mrs. Wagner, Mrs. Wagner, she knew him. There was not that many Jews in Cincinnati either, but he was in Cincinnati, and they were quite close with Rabbi Eliezer Silver. So Rabbi Eliezer Silver said, the quote was, from the moment Rabbi Aaron arrived in America, the Vadat Sola, which was the rescue crew, came to life and worked on a completely different plane than it had previously. There was a famous meeting with the Secretary of the American Treasury, Henry Morgenthau, who was a totally assimilated Jew. Now, in this, I've read elsewhere some of the extent of Morgenthau's the conversation that Rabbi Kotler had with Morgenthau, because Morgenthau was a friend of President Truman. And next week, I hope I'll tell you more about a meeting with Shlomo Lawrence, who's the biographer who writes this. I'll tell you a little about next week, and his meeting with President Truman. It's mind-boggling. You'll hear about his meeting with President Truman. I'm sure it's going to represent some stuff about President Truman that you did not know. But we know that Chaim Weizmann tried to get into Truman, and Truman at the beginning, he didn't want the state. It's pushed back, but Chaim Weizmann, he said, "You got to let me in. You got to let me in," and he couldn't get into Truman. Henry Morgenthau was the Secretary of Treasury. He was very, very close to Truman, and they kept on nudging, Morgenthau to get him a meeting with Weizmann, to get Weizmann a meeting with Truman. And finally, Truman agreed to it because he was a friend of his from his youth, whatever, and he agreed to it. Rabbi Kotler met with Morgenthau, thinking that he was a man who had some influence. And Rabbi Kotler did not speak any English. I don't know if over the next 20 years he learned a few years, but in 1941, when he came to America, he didn't speak any English. Right? So this was not in 41, it was a little bit later. He had a man named Irving Bunin. Now, there were a few great lay people in America who supported, not only financially, who took the reins of helping some of these great rabbis, along with Stephen Klein. One famous one who was Rabbi Kotler's right-hand man was a man named Irving Bunin. May his memory be a blessing. He was acting as a translator. And I'm going to tell you, it's much stronger than this. He said, "Tell Morgenthau," this is in Yiddish, "in the plainest possible terms, that all his work as Secretary of Treasury is nothing as much as saving one Jewish life." And he said, and you tell him that this is his opportunity to do something for the Jewish people. And if he doesn't take advantage of it now, who knows what will happen to him. Again, I don't see I've seen more of this. So Irving Bunin is standing there next to the Secretary of Treasury, and he tells him, Rabbi Kotler is asking that you please help the Jewish people. And Rabbi Kotler understands that he didn't give over the message the way he had wanted it to. Because Irving Bunin was being the American Secretary of the Treasury. He didn't want to. And Rabbi Kotler said to him, "I want you to give over the message exactly as I said it. Don't worry about what's going to happen. It's on me, not on you." And Bunin gave over the scathing message to Henry Morgenthau, and it made a huge impression on him. And after that, he started to do more on behalf of the Jews of Europe, at least trying to make inroads with some of the leaders of American Jewry. He also he took the presidency and the chairmanship of so many important organizations in the United States, Agudas Yisrael, and he said at a convention, shortly after he arrived, Agudas Yisrael's purpose is to ensure that the Jewish people's connection to Torah is not severed. It's a good thing that Agudas Yisrael exists as an organized group with focused strength, declaring that the Jewish people is compelled to submit to the Torah. Many people feel that Judaism is a matter for individuals. However, individuals wouldn't be able to achieve such a thing. Therefore, he was very behind this group called Agudas Yisrael, which still exists today. It's gone through different variations, but it still exists today. So this is how Rabbi Aaron came to America. Next week, we'll discuss some of the things that he did to raise American Jewry, but fascinatingly enough, also to inject life into the Torah world in Eretz Yisrael, which was small at the time. And his idea was not having yeshivas for older students. He left that to others. We'll talk next week in Mitzvah Hashem about what he did to make sure that there would be a future of Torah for the Jewish people in Eretz Yisrael.
All right, this is Parshat Shoftim. But before I talk about Parshat Shoftim, I just want to mention to you that we are now in the month of Elul. You might have remembered that Rosh Hashanah was Sunday. Monday was actually the first day of Rosh Hashanah. Tuesday was the second day, and Wednesday is the third day. Today is the fourth day of Elul. There are 30 days in Elul. say, and therefore there's only about 26 more days for us to completely change ourselves over before Rosh Hashanah. So just so you know where we are in the count.
No stress.
No stress, just and make some changes. Try to make some changes if you can. If you humors if you want to, but like one of the things I did this year was I got a new type of sitter that I haven't ever used before. It's an interlinear sitter, and I decided I would use that to really concentrate more on my davening, on my prayers, in order to really, because I generally daven from an all Hebrew sitter, so I know most of the words, but I don't know all of the words, and even the words that I think I know, I don't necessarily know. So I'm really trying to focus myself more on being really accurate in my davening in terms of knowing what I'm saying. So that's what I decided to do this year. So I just started doing that. It's a I like to use this little tiny sitter, because it's small, it's handy and everything. But so this is bigger. So I'm having a little struggle with balancing it on my knees and, figuring out where to put it, and how to use it. But it's enhancing my davening. It's enhancing my effort. I should say, I don't know that it's enhancing my davening yet, but it's enhancing my effort to daven better. I'm trying to daven better. That's coming through. Whether I'm davening better, I don't know. I don't think so. I think I'm still too distracted by the difference, but that's just one thing to do, Or if you don't go to the mikveh on Erev Shabbos, go to the mikveh on Erev Shabbos. Or if you go to the mikveh on Erev Shabbos and go to the mikveh during the week, or do pick up something else. Only use Chalav Yisrael, or only use Pas Yisrael during this time, or whatever kind of thing is going to make you focus more on. I really want to be a better servant to Hashem, in whatever way you think that works. It doesn't have to be with mitzvahs or things like that either. It can be with trying to be a nicer person. That's a huge one. I've given up on that. So
That's
Someone else. One of the reasons that I give the sitters to the bar and bat mitzvah is
it's a good reason, because he gives the interlinear.
that Oxford.
Yeah.
I always davened in a sitter that had Hebrew on one side and English on the other. And then once I saw this sitter, I thought to myself, now I'm going to be able to learn as I daven. And I can't learn as well as I used to, but it still helps.
Good. It's a good thing. I think it's a good thing to do. Okay. There are 41 mitzvahs in this week's parsha. Last week there were 55. A lot of mitzvahs to choose from. I'm going to try and skim. I'm not going to do what I did last week, where I went through all 55. This time I'm going to just hit several as we go through, but I really want to concentrate on one that according to the Rambam and the Chinuch is not a mitzvah. It's not even counted as part of the Taryag mitzvahs, but it's so important, and the Ramban counts it as a mitzvah. But it's so important that I thought I'd focus on that when we get to it. It's a little bit later on the parsha, but let's just start off with this is on page 1024, 1025. Shotrim v'shotrim. Shoftim are judges. Shotrim are officers. They're the people that enforce the judgments. It's like the bailiffs, what we would call nowadays a bailiff, maybe.
cops.
Could be the cops too. It's the people that enforce the judgment that's made by the judges. Titen lecha b'chol shorecha, and you shall have them in all of your shorecha. So shorecha generally means your gates, but in this case, gates really wouldn't make so much sense. So it really means in all of your cities. And sometimes it's used for cities, but in the Shema, when we talk about having a mezuzah on your gates, on the shorecha, it means you're literally there. It means your gates, and not the cities. Here it means the cities. Asher Hashem Elokecha nosei lecha, which Hashem your God gave to you, lish votecha, to your tribes. And then it says, I think a very important statement, but at the end of the first pasuk, and that is V'shovtu es ha'am mishpat tzedek. And they shall judge the people with a mishpat tzedek, with a righteous judgment. Now, in Hasidus, what they do is they take these things, even though they're related to the judges, related to the overall, Jewish community, Jewish nation, and they interpret it in a way so that, because especially this is Elul and we're working on ourselves, so that you can take it as relating to yourself individually. And so in this case, then when it says, and they shall judge the people with righteous judgment, so the Hasidim will tell you that what that means is that you should judge your friends, you should judge the Jewish people that you come in contact with righteous judgment, which is another way of saying don l'tzav schus. Don, right? Tzav is a weight to weigh, schus, to merit. So judge your fellow favorably. So as you're judging people, try not to focus on their negative attributes, of which undoubtedly there are many, but try to block those out, mute those, and look for, I know it would be hard to find, but look for that one or two good things about them. I'm being facetious, but you know what I'm saying? It's a lot easier to focus on the negative things about people than it is about the positive things about people. Yeah. Or is it just me? Am I the only one that does that?
Ignore the guy. You see negative stuff. See it, you see the negative, you do it, so it's not the negative.
Right. So try to do that in this particular way and use this parsha as talking to us individually, that we're the judge and we're judging the people around us. And maybe it's just me. I do it all the time. Oh, this person made a mistake. This person made a mistake. I'm trying to get no, I'm not looking for mistakes now. I'm looking, look at how great that person did that. Look at how great that was. That's what I'm trying to do. Well, I don't know, but I certainly do.
I always thought that you should look at the person with leaning more toward the appreciation of his benefits.
Absolutely. That's what you should be doing. Exactly. That's what I'm suggesting.
Yeah.
That's what I'm suggesting. Look for the good. Look for the Tzelem Elokim. Look for the good in every single person.
Yeah.
Right? Every single Jew, if you want to narrow it down. So, look for the good and forget about the bad. It's not, because listen, what you hope other people are doing about you is exactly that, right? I know who I am. I'm hoping that everybody looks at the good in me and then just ignores the bad. What bad? So that's what we try to work on that. That's something that we can get from this parsha. And then it says, don't take a bribe. And Reb Dessler talks about this in Strive for Truth in the first volume. And he talks about the fact that when we make decisions, when we do anything that we do, we have to realize that we are coming from a place of bias. We have certain preconceived, you might say preconceived notions, preconceived thoughts, things that we think we know, but also we really have, if we got down to the basics, we have a ratzon. A ratzon is a will. And our will, if we get down really to the nub of it, you can try to get down to your will and see, what does my will really want for me? What does my ratzon really want? And a lot of times, maybe the person's ratzon is for material things, or for money, or for whatever kinds of things, or maybe it's for spirituality, whatever it's for. But when a person then makes a decision as to whether to do X or Y in going forward, it's coming from a place of bias. It's coming from a place where we're really already have some kind of a want for that particular thing. And then our decision-making process becomes really more of a rationalization or a justification for choosing that thing that we really want anyway deep inside. But if you can try to get to peel away the layers and to get into what really our rutzon is. What is my want? What do I really want? And then say, oh, is that really a legitimate thing that I'm wanting or not? And then maybe try to eliminate that bias and then make a decision. Follow what I'm saying there? It's like,
Yeah.
it's pretty heavy.
Notice it says don't take a bribe. It doesn't say don't give a bribe.
Right. Don't take a bribe. And what it says, if you look, it says, will blind the eyes of the wise to make righteous words crooked. And the Gemara makes it clear. The Gemara makes clear the fact that if a person takes a bribe, even to judge righteously, that's going to blind his eyes. So even to take money in order to judge fairly, to judge correctly, is a problem.
But there's no onus on the person giving the bribe.
Well, it's putting a stumbling block in front of the blind then, right? So at least it would be, at least to be violating that, at least to be violating that. So, so you'd at least be violating that. That's a big one too. I was going to tell you that there are several examples in the Gemara. Three of them is what I'll try and relate to you about great people, Tanoim, in the Gemara, who were judges and were asked to judge cases, and they did. And then they had an experience with a person who was going to be judged in their court before the court, so they didn't know. So Shmuel, for example, Shmuel's in Amora, but Shmuel was on his way to the court to be judged, and he had to cross a bridge, and the bridge evidently was wobbly, or it was slippery, or it was, you know, I really enjoyed hearing that about Rabbi Meyer, about the connection between Kavna and Slutsk. I didn't know that before, that there was a bridge connecting the two cities that people couldn't walk across easily because it was it was icy or it was muddy, or in any event, there's a bridge, and so Shmuel's on his way, and the bridge is wobbly or it's icy or whatever, and a person helps him along the way, and Shmuel says to him, "Where are you going?" He says, "I'm going to court, and because you're going to judge a case for me today." And Shmuel says, "No, I'm recusing myself." Right? Shmuel didn't know the guy before, but he helped him just a little bit to get across a bridge. And Shmuel said, "That's too much for me." And I'll explain to you why, what the depth of it is in a second. But he said, "No, I can't judge your case now." So he got another judge for the guy. Then there's Rabbi Tarfon, who had a feather or some kind of piece of lint on his jacket, on his tunic, and somebody saw it and you know, very respectfully, you know, brushed it off. And he said, "What are you doing here?" And he says, I'm on my way to a case. I have a case in front of you." And so Rabbi Tarfon said, "No, I got to recuse myself because you know, I got to recuse myself." Right? And then there's a case of Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel had a sharecropper on property that Rabbi Shmuel owned, and the sharecropper would bring Rabbi Shmuel's share during the harvest season to him on a weekly basis every Friday. So he'd bring it every Friday. This one particular week, the sharecropper happened to have a court case, and the courts, of course, were open on Mondays and Thursdays. So he came up on Thursday and said, "I'm going up there anyway, so I might as well bring the share for Rabbi Shmuel on Thursday instead of on Friday because it'll save me a trip. And so I'll just do it all at once." So he brings it to him on Thursday, and Rabbi Shmuel says, "I can't judge your case. You brought me this stuff a day early. That's like a bribe." So what's the sensitivity that they have? The sensitivity that they have is hakoras hatov. Hakoras hatov is recognition of the good, right? It's gratitude. In a broad sense, we say it's gratitude. I think it's a little bit deeper, but it's gratitude in terms of the fact that you recognize the good that's being done to you or for you by someone else, and how you should express your appreciation for that. And that's called hakoras hatov. Hakoras means to recognize. Hatov is the good, recognizing the good that was done. And so because this little good that was done in terms, in terms of helping Shmuel across the bridge, or taking the feather off of Rav Tarfon's tunic, or bringing the sharecropping share early, a day early, The Rebbeim were so sensitive to Hakoras HaTov that they recognized how much appreciation they should have to those people, and therefore they became their best friends. Because they recognized the good that they had done for them and how much appreciation they should have in return, and so how much really they should love them. And so how could I judge your case? You're my best friend. So that's their sensitivity that they had. So I'm going to extend it just a little bit further, and that is Hakoras HaTov is recognizing the good in other people. Not only just recognizing the good they do for you, but the good in them itself, and focusing on that good, so that you wouldn't be able to judge them in a case because you're always going to judge them on the good side, right? So that's the kind of relationships that we want to try to establish, especially during Elul. Rabbi Meyer said that you have to recognize specifically during Elul that everything that happens to you comes from Hashem. Of course, that's 24/7 anyway, but during Elul especially, and that is the people that come into your life, the circumstances that come into your life, whatever happens, that is all coming from Hashem for you to learn from, specifically this Elul, to make a change in some way, and to really appreciate it in that fashion. So that's this judgment that we're going through, judging others, judging ourselves, and trying to come up with a unbiased, as much as possible, opinion of ourselves and what we need to work on. And we have 26 days before Rosh Hashanah, and then 10 more days to Yom Kippur, and then until Hashanah Rabbah, the end of Sukkot, and then even the Hasidim say all the way until Hanukkah. So there's some leeway here, but try to do it during the time of Elul, because Elul is where they say that the king is in the field. Hashem is with us. Hashem is closer to us during this time of Elul than other times, and so the tshuva is easier. Changing, judging it oneself is easier during this particular time than other times in the year. Not that you can't do it during other. You can always do tshuva. You can always change, but it's a little easier at this time of year. And also, I think too, we say a bracha in the Shemona Esrei 3 times a day, Borech Hashanim, where we're blessing the years, and we say Zos Hashana, this year, meaning bless this year. So we only have 26 days left, but we're still blessing this year, because on Mincha of Erev Rosh Hashanah, we're also going to say that same bracha, and we could actually change the whole year in that one last moment. It's easier to do it if you have more time. But just so you don't get to, avoid the Erev Rosh Hashanah rush and do it early. Okay, let's go on. The next halachas that the parsha goes into is appointing a king. A king. This is on well, I skipped one thing. This is on the second Aliyah. This is on page 1028, 1029. I skipped over some important stuff, but everything's important in the Torah. What can I say? Kings are problematic, right? Kings are problematic. First of all, even having a king, although it says here that when you come into the land that Hashem, your God, gives you and possess it and settle in it, and you will say, I will set a king over myself like all the nations that are around me. You shall surely set over yourself a king, and then it gives the halachas of kings. But theoretically, we shouldn't have asked for a king. We should have gone along just with, we were basically being governed by prophets, by the Nevi'im.
Did we ask? We're being told.
No, if you look at the language of the pasuk, you'll see that it says when you will ask, because we want a king like everybody else. That's also a clue that we're not doing the right thing.
How we were being ruled by the judges.
We were being ruled by the judges beforehand. And but the people didn't like that. Shmuel was the last one of the prophets that ruled in that way, And he was the one that was told by Hashem to anoint Shaul, and then later to anoint David, even when Shaul was still alive, because Shaul had lost the kingdom by not following the instructions of Hashem.
Did Hashem pick the kings after King David? Or it was just what people did?
Well, Hashem causes everything to happen, but ostensibly it went through a number of battles. Adoniah wanted to be king instead of Shlomo Melech after David Melech died, and so there were big battles there. And with David, there were big battles between he and Shaul.
Moshe knew all this history a long time ago. Why didn't he warn the Jewish people not to have a king?
Well, even one might say that in this particular language, he was warning them not to have a king. And then he was telling them, but if you nevertheless say you want to have a king, then this is the way you need to have one.
And the Mashiach comes from a king. I mean,
Mashiach ben David, absolutely. But it could have been through a king like Moshe. Moshe was also a king, although we never referred to Moshe as a king. But we call him a Nasi. We call him Moshe Rabbeinu. But he had all the powers of a king.
He was the president. And George Washington refused to be king, and Moshe refused to be king.
I don't know that, but I don't know about Moshe. George Washington, I agree.
isn't it so that a Jewish king is different than maybe other kings, whereas the king and the people of the land are his subjects?
Yeah.
A Jewish king is more like one of the brethren.
On the highest level, that's true. And there's whole books in the Navi, Malachim Aleph, Malachim Beis, Shmuel Aleph, Shmuel Beis, and Malachim Aleph, Malachim Beis, that go through the kings of Yehuda and the kings of Yisrael. And they are terrible, most of them. They're horrible.
So the Sahara took over, or what happened?
Evidently, the Yitzhak took over. I mean, you have a situation where you have Hiskiyahu, who was really, really a righteous king, tremendously righteous king, descendant of Shlomo Melech. His father was a Rasha, was idolatry, and his son Menashe was the worst. Was the worst. Although he would tell you because the Yetzer Hara at that time for idolatry was so great that he couldn't resist. That's what he would say.
A while back, he told us that basically we get the leader that we deserve. So maybe that had a lot to do with it.
That had a lot to do with it too. Yeah, that's what it says in this week's Parsha also, that you should go to the Kohen of the time. So you should go to the leader of the time to get your answers. And don't expect everybody to be like a Moshe Rabbeinu. Then you get the leaders that you deserve. And the leader for your time is the leader that you deserve. And that's the leader that you're supposed to go to ask your questions.
What was the primary difference between judges and kings? Were they just trying to be like secular people?
The judges were getting their instructions from HaKadosh Baruch Hu directly from prophecy. Most kings were not prophets. Some kings were. David was a prophet. Shlomo was a prophet. There were some kings that were prophets, but mostly prophets were getting prophecy, and they were judging the Jewish people, and they were conducting the Jewish people in accordance with the prophecy that they were getting from Hashem, where the kings took on for themselves.
Just wondering, like power. and
Even
stuff
David
like that.
Melech, even Shlomo Melech. Shlomo Melech himself rebelled because he felt that these laws that we have right here dealing with the kings gives you the reasons, right? Don't have too many wives, don't have too many horses, don't have too many horses because you might go back to Yerushalayim, don't have too many wives because maybe they'll lead you astray towards idol worship. Shlomo Melech, nah, not me.
Oh, he said, but they didn't give a number. What do you mean 2 men? I only have 1,000.
So we say it's 18. The Gemara says it's 18. And that's based upon David Melech, because David Melech had 18 wives. He did have concubines as well. I don't know how to say it in plural, but a Pelagish is a concubine. Pelagshim, Pelagshim, something like that.
Just imagine trying to
Keep 18 wives happy.
yeah, exactly.
Imagine those honey-do lists.
What?
Imagine those honey-do lists.
Oh my God.
Henry VIII, if they give you too much trouble, you cut it. Send it back to the parents. It's not.
So one of the things that a king is supposed to do is a king is supposed to have two copies of the Torah. He's supposed to write two copies of the Torah for himself. One is he takes with him. He's supposed to strap it to his arm, like strapping tefillin on. He's supposed to have it with him all the time. So when he goes out, wherever he goes, he has the Torah with him. So he can, if he has to judge people at the time, he can look it up in the Torah and he can see what he's supposed to do. And then he's supposed to have one that he keeps in his geniza, that he keeps in his treasure house. And Rabbi Meyer once said, or maybe more than once, as I remember, because I remember it, so it must have been more than one time, that he said that what's the significance of that? Significance of that is that as we learn, and so we learn in the yeshiva, or we learn in classes, or wherever we learn, and then we go out in our regular workaday world, and we try to apply the things that we learned, but sometimes there are rough edges, and we don't understand it quite so well. And maybe people convince us that it should be otherwise or something like that. So we have to go back and compare the Torah that we've been operating with the Torah that's back in the storehouse, in the treasure house. And that's going back to the yeshiva, or going back to the class, or going back to the rabbi and asking him for clarification and things like that. So the king had to do that. The king would go out with his Torah, and maybe the Torah would be shot up with arrows or scuffed up in whatever way. And so therefore he'd go back and compare it to the Torah in the treasure house, and then know whether or not there were changes that had happened to his traveling Torah that he had to then correct.
So what I was learning today, this morning, that it's not enough to abide by the law of the Torah. We have to go beyond the law, and that one of the reasons that the temple was destroyed was that we were only going by the law of the Torah, not beyond the law.
And when you say beyond the law, was the term that was used leaf name Mishuras Adin? Was that the term that was used, or was it going in accordance with Hashem's ratzon?
It was the difference between following the Torah legally and either operating morally or not morally. That there was something beyond what Jews have to do.
Okay. So I was just trying to get a clarification if you remember the Hebrew that was used when you were learning.
The Hebrew word.
But was it you? Oh, he just said it in English?
He said morally, not just legally.
Okay. Okay.
Maybe
So it could be one of two things. It could be leaf name Mishuras Adin, which means we go beyond the letter of the law to apply it. And this another related concept is that we go in accordance with the spirit of Hashem. That
would be the same.
Okay, so we go in accordance with the spirit of Hashem. And there's something that says that we should be straight and good with Hashem. And I'm going to focus on something a little bit later where it says that we should be wholeheartedly following Hashem, meaning not necessarily everything exactly as written, but in accordance with what wholeheartedly following Hashem would be. I'll get to that in a few minutes, but I think that might have been what you're saying. And I agree. I agree completely. I agree. Not that that means anything.
What are you reading this?
I study with Rabbi Aaron every Thursday morning. Finishing up.
Which page are we on?
So we're now going to page 1030, 1031. And this is dealing with the Matnas Kahuna. This is dealing with this is chapter 18. And these are the gifts of the Kohanim, gifts to the Kohanim. And I just want to point out, there are 24 altogether. The kings have 30 prerogatives, I'll call them, benefits that they get. And the Torah study has 48 ways to wisdom, right? It's really 48 gifts that one gets when they're studying Torah. That helps them. So anyway, so this is part of the 24 gifts. So it says that if one shecks a chulin animal, an animal that's not being brought as a korban, but just for meat, a lamb, a sheep rather, and a goat or a cow or a cattle. It doesn't have to be a female cow; it could be a male cow. But when one checks that, one has to give. A male cow, it's a bull, right?
No, we're all from the same, no kind of refrigerator.
So when one checks that, so one has to give the foreleg and the jaw and the maw. This is on Pasuk 3, the end of Pasuk 3. He shall give the Kohen the foreleg, the jaw, and the maw. The maw is the fourth of the four stomachs. There are four stomachs in kosher animals. There are four stomachs, right? They're rudiments. They're ruminates, I think they're called. They chew their cud, and so it goes down into. I think it gets to the second stomach, and then they regurgitate it up. They chew the cud, then it goes down. It goes into the third, and then the fourth stomach. So the fourth stomach is the final part of the process, and that's called the ma. It's called. It's good. It's part of the meat. It's part of the meat.
Okay, you can eat the stomach?
Right. You can eat the stomach. It's edible. You can eat the stomach. The jaw is the tongue, right? It's a delicacy to have tongue. I don't like it myself, but I know it's a delicacy. And Kohanim eat tongue. No,
they're made it all the time.
all the time. And the foreleg. So why those three things? What is significant about those three things? So I'll tell you what Rashi tells us. So Rashi says that the foreleg, because that represents the hand of Pinchas, who took the spear to kill Cosby and Zimri, and who got the covenant of the Kohen, right, and the covenant of peace. So it's because the foreleg represents the hand. And because it says in it, and this is in the end of Parshas Balak, and it says, and he took a spear in his hand, and then the jaw represents prayer, right? The mouth represents prayer, and that is because it says Pinchas rose up and he prayed. That's actually in Tehillim. That's not in the Chumash, but that's in Tehillim. And then it says, and the stomach. So what's the stomach for? You know. And the woman into her stomach, because that's where he killed Cosby and Zimri, right? He killed Cosby by jabbing her with a spear in the stomach. So that's why those three gifts are given to the Kohen. It's a connection back to Pinchas and the dedication that he had. 248, the Ramach is 248, which is the 248 organs or sinews or however you want it, parts of the body that represent the 248 positive mitzvahs, that he was positively focused without 1 ounce of selfishness, but only selflessness in doing that particular act. And that's why he was rewarded in that way. And that's why the Kohanim were rewarded in that particular way. And now I want to go to where I want to spend a little more time this is chapter 18, and it's Pasuk 13. It's on page 1033 in the English. In the Hebrew, it's only 5 words. On the Hebrew side, it is Yud Gimel. It's you see where that says Hamishi on the right side of 1032 in the margin. So one line above that, Tomim Tihye Im Hashem Elokecha. Tomim Tihye Im Hashem Elokecha. Now this is coming in the context of prohibitions of being involved in sorcery, in soothsaying, in trying to talk to the dead. Of in Yadani, right? Of is where a person would speak from under his arms. The spirits would speak from under his arms. Yadani is where he would have a piece of bird bone in his mouth, and without moving his lips, the bird bone would speak and say what the dead people were talking about. And so those are the prohibitions that we have. On these kinds of things. It says, there shall not be found among you one who causes his son or daughter to pass through fire, who practices divinations, an astrologer, one who reads omens, a sorcerer, or an animal charmer, or one who inquires of Av and Yidoni, or one who consults the dead. For anyone who does these is an abomination of Hashem, and because of these abominations, Hashem, your God, banishes the nations from before you. That's why the Canaanites are being banished from Eretz Canaan. And then it says, our pasuk, you shall be wholehearted with Hashem your God. Now, this is not according to the Rambam and according to the Chinuch, this is not a numbered mitzvah. This is not one of the 613 mitzvahs. The reason that the Rambam has a whole introduction to his Sefer HaMitzvahs, which goes through all the criteria that he uses for when to count something in a mitzvah, when to not count something as a mitzvah. This probably falls outside of being counted as a mitzvah because it is a basic tenet. This is a basic thing that we, all Jews, need to do, and we need to do all of the mitzvahs with this in mind. So it's one of those things. There's another one called Kodesh Tihiyeh, that you should be holy. Also, the Rambam doesn't count that as a mitzvah because that's just a mindset. It's a general overall gestalt that you have to have in terms of how you're doing everything. And then another one is to be straight and good. That also is not counted as a mitzvah. It's basically just in the way that we're supposed to live our lives overall and do the mitzvahs under those umbrellas of those things. Well, this is one of those umbrellas, to be wholehearted with Hashem. So what I'm going to do now is read the Rashi and kind of expound on it just a little bit in the Rashi. And this is on page 1032. If you care to follow it, it's on the top line of the left-hand column where you see a little parenthesis Yud Gimel. That's the pasuk that we're in. And then Rashi has what's called the Divrei HaMaskil, which we would call a heading, which is in dark print in the art scroll. Tamim Tihiyeh Im Hashem Elokecha, where he quotes really the entire pasuk. And then what Rashi does is explain it to us very, very succinctly, but in 5 different components, because there's 5 words in the parsha, 5 words in the pasuk, and so he's going to explain it in 5 different ways. It's going to all flow together as like one sentence, one long sentence, but it's 5 different components. And those 5 different components relate to actually the name of Hashem, which I'll relate to in a couple minutes. But what Rashi says here is that he's halek imo bisamimos. Walk with him with tamimos. Now, have you ever heard the word tamim before? Tamimos, where? Remember?
We're singing a song on the Torah.
We do, right? That's true. Okay, and how about Noach? Wasn't he called an Ish Tam?
Yeah.
And what about Yaakov? He was called an Ish Tam also, right? When he was born, right? He was an Ish Tam. Spent his well, no.
Humble.
This Tom is with a Tuf and not a Tes. So Tom here merely means wholehearted, pure. When we go through the Karbanos, like we just landed on Rosh Chodesh, and we say that Tamimim, that we bring Tamimim, that we bring whole Tamim, we bring whole animals that have no blemish, right? They're whole, they're pure, they're uncorrupted, unblemished, I guess, right? And so Rashi says, so walk with him with wholeheartedness, with Tamim, like Yaakov, like even a Noach, right? Even though Noach walked with God, Abraham walked ahead of God, but even Noach was pure-hearted. He was saved, And then it says, tzapeh lo, look ahead to him. And that's going to future tense, and that's picking up with the second word of the pasuk, which is tiyeh, which means will be. You shall be in the future. You shall be wholehearted. So that's in the future. In other words, look ahead. Trust in Hashem. Trust that whatever is going to happen in the future, it's all coming from Hashem. You don't have to go out there and go to the Ouija board or to the tarot cards or the crystal ball and or the astrology charts and try to figure out what's going to happen in the future. No, that's not where we are. We are going to rather trust with Hashem and walk with him a day at a time. So we say in the morning davening, after the main part of the davening, we say Kedusha Uvol Etzion, and in that davening we say Baruch Hashem Yom Yom. Blessed is Hashem day by day. Blessed by Hashem every day, right? A day at a time. A day at a time. So that's the second part of this. Third part, velod tachkor achar choasidos, and do not delve into the future. Don't try and figure out the future. What is going to happen in the future. We can't do that. We don't have Nevi'im anymore, especially, but on a person on themselves, they shouldn't delve into the future. Ella, rather, koma shiyovo alecha, whatever comes upon you, kabel bismimus, accept it with wholeheartedness. Whatever comes upon you, accept it and know it's coming from Hashem. It's good. It may not be good that you can recognize as good at the moment, but know that it's good. The ultimate level is to, even when it doesn't look like good, to know it's good. That's it's beyond Gam Zulatova. Gam Zulatova is it will be good. It's bad now, but it will be good. But the level of Rabbi Akiva took it beyond his teacher. Gamish, what was his name? Gamzu Latova. Well, that's what he said, Gamzu Latova. But no, his name is I can't remember. It's something like that. It's Gams, I can't remember. Anyway, he's saying it will be good. But Rabbi Akiva took it one step higher, and that was it is good. That's the really hard level to understand. It is good. It's the back tzitzis. I've told you that before, right? It's the back tzitzis.
Rear protection.
Where it doesn't look like good, right? It doesn't look like, it's not easy to find like your front tzitzis. It's hard to find, but it's good. The back tzitzis are just as good as the front tzitzis. They're just as good as the front tzitzis. It's just harder to find. And then you'll be with him. The next part is va'oz tihiyeh imo, and then you'll be with him. Ulechelko, says Rashi, and of his portion. So the whole Rashi says, just I'll read it in English, walk with him with wholeheartedness, look ahead to him, trust in what he has in store for you. Do not delve into the future, but rather whatever comes upon you, accept with wholeheartedness, and then you will be with him and his portion. Because you'll now be Hashem's portion in this world, because you'll be the testimony to Hashem being in this world because of all the good that's happening to you. So that's this Rashi on this particular point, and this is really such a really core value to really accept and just go day at a time and understand that Hashem is doing for us exactly what we need in exactly the way we need it, as difficult as it sometimes is.
And sometimes it's very difficult.
Sometimes it is. There's no question about it.
Yeah, it's the other day too, though. Like you said, why did this really great thing happen to me? Like, what did I do?
Right, and the good. If you can recognize that on the good, then so much the better. Most times, I think people say, when something not good happens to them, why me? But when something good happens, oh, didn't I do a good job on that? Right, that's like the guy that Sheldon says with his joke. He was looking for the parking space. Oh, please, God, I need a parking space. I'll do anything. I'll do anything. I'll give tzedakah. I'll do whatever you want. And then oh, never mind. I've found one. Okay. Okay. Now I'm going on to chapter 19. Something in chapter 19. Chapter 20, I think, going all the way to chapter 20. We have prophecy. We have to tell between good prophets, not good prophets. We have to preserve the boundaries. We go into to Edim Zomimim, very technical but very important. Really, the whole underpinning of the whole Jewish legal system. But now going to 20, chapter 20. So this, if you look at the way this chapter starts on page 1098, Ki tzetzi l'milchama, when you go out to battle. And then
39, 38.
Well, what did I say? 1038. Yeah, so now I can't even see with my glasses on. And so if you look at the next parsha, which is on page 1046, just quickly flip over to that. What is that? How does that start? Exactly the same way, right? Kitzetzi l'machoma, kitzetzi l'machoma. So Rabbi Twersky pointed out to me many years ago that this next part of the parsha, which is the last part of this parsha, is happening between the wars, right? In the middle of war, where the tendency is to become more and more callous, more and more indifferent, numb, not as moved as we were at the beginning. I don't know if you can remember back to October 7th and how you felt that morning of Shmini Atzeres, and just how horrid that was. And then when it started coming out about all the atrocities that did happen, how much worse. But then as each day goes by, I was telling myself this morning, I was saying, it's been so many days now. It's in the 600s of days. And instead of following it every single day, I don't anymore. It's just, and I should, because I did things to try and get myself to make sure that I would focus on it. One of the things is I don't put any sweetener in my coffee. I haven't since October 7th or October 8th or whenever I took that on pretty quickly after. But now but you get used to it. You get used to having now bitter coffee.
You like it better.
It certainly is not as jolting as it was when I first took that on. Then for a long time I said I'm not going to get a new hat until the hostages are all released. But then we had this big thing at the yeshiva, and I had to be present. It was a big dinner that we had, and I had to be presentable for how that was, and I couldn't wear my old hat. So I went to Rabbi Siderson, Rabbi Meyer, and Kerry Berman, and they were based in for me, and they were matir my neder about not getting a new hat. So I did get a new hat. Now my new hat is old. And I'm thinking about getting another new hat now. But so it wears off, it just wears off. But I think about it, I try to think about it, but it's hard to feel the same. So Rabbi Twersky said that this next part of the Parsha is dealing with that concept, and it's putting it in the middle of a war, and it is a kind of mitzvah that is a non-Jewish mitzvah. It's a shocking mitzvah. And that is, we'll go over to page 1042. And this is the mitzvah of Eglah Arufah. Eglah Arufah.
Yeah.
This is a mitzvah that if a corpse is found on the land that Hashem your God gives to you to possess it, fallen in the field, and it was not known who smote it, so it's a murdered person in the middle of nowhere, and you don't know who killed this person, then your elders and judges shall go out and measure, meaning the whole Sanhedrin goes out and measures to the closest cities around the corpse. And it shall be that the city nearest the corpse, the elders of that city shall take a heifer with which no work has been done, which has not been pulled with a yoke. It has to be within its first year also. The elders of the city shall then bring that heifer down to a harsh valley, not necessarily where this corpse was found, but you need the corpse to figure out which city is going to do this. But then they bring it down to a hard river valley because there's not going to be any benefit that anybody can get from either this calf once it's been selected, and certainly after it's been killed, or from the place where it was killed. Can't get any benefit from it. You can't grow crops there. You can't get any kind of benefit. They did say you could probably build on it. The Gemara goes into this in the Gemara in Sota, and maybe you can build on it, but you can't plant on it. And so this harsh valley, which cannot be worked and cannot be sown, and they shall axe the back of its neck in the valley. That's not a Jewish way of treating animals. We have a whole concept called tsar bali chayim. We're not allowed to distress animals. Is that, how would you say tsar? You're not allowed to to hurt other animals. You're not allowed to hurt animals, just to hurt them. If you need the animal for food, so you can do the shechita. The shechita is designed by Hashem to be, so he says, the least painful way for the animal to die. But you're not allowed to pain animals. So there's another mitzvah that we have that you're supposed to help your friend to load or unload his donkey.
Your friend or your enemy?
Your friend, but I'm going to get to the enemy, right? So now let's say you have an enemy and he needs to have his donkey loaded, which is not good for the donkey, because when you're loading the donkey, it's going to be tsar on the donkey. But you have a mitzvah to unload the donkey. So your friend has a donkey that needs to be unloaded, and your enemy has a donkey that needs to be loaded. So what do you do? So the tendency is to help the friend, right? The tendency is to help the friend unload his donkey, because you're then helping the donkey and you're also helping your friend. But what do you need to do? You need to help your enemy load his donkey. Even though it's Sar Bali Chaim, you have to do that because it's more important for you to battle your Yetzer Hara and help your enemy than even the suffering of the animal. Gemara and Bava Kama.
So that's why we feed the Gazans.
Rob death first, then you
So-
help your enemy,
Right.
and then you give to him, you won't hate.
If you do, that's the goal. The goal is if you give to someone who you're not getting along with, right? Like taking him to lunch at the deli or whatever your thing happens to be, then by giving to that person, it's going to create a relationship. And we started off the whole shir today by talking about the chorus tov that we're supposed to have for people and how we're supposed to look at the good in people. And what was supposed to happen is then as we do that, we'll develop these closer relationships. And if we look for the good instead of the bad, we'll see that we don't have any enemies because there's nobody bad out there that we know.
So would that apply more to a Jewish person who's maybe not?
I think it's a Jewish person.
Not like
I think it's a Jewish person. I think it's a Jewish person.
Palestinian.
But listen, but it doesn't hurt to have good relationships for it's called Darkei Shalom, to have peaceful relations with our non-Jewish neighbors also. Right? We're living with people. We need to try and have good relations with them also. But the mitzvah per se, I think, is for a Jew. And because it says, V'ahavta l're'echa kamocha. You should love your re'echa. Your re'echa is your
Brother,
Neighbor, friend.
neighbor,
fellow.
but it means Jewish, your fellow. It means your Jewish fellow. And that's who we have the mitzvah to love, is our Jewish fellow. I don't think we have a mitzvah. We should do it anyway because of Darkei Shalom, because of the ways of peace, but not because of mitzvah. So here we have this very non-Jewish mitzvah where we're going to chop off the back of the neck of this calf, little tiny baby calf. How cute. Because we need to be shocked back into the emotions that we need to have about how bad things are. We can't just say, oh, there's a dead person out there. Okay, so there was yesterday and the day before and the day before. We've got to shock ourselves back in to really caring. I'm talking to myself, really tasting the bitterness of that coffee.
It's like all the school shootings. I mean, Columbine happened 25 years ago. It's like, wow. And now it's like just the thing in Minneapolis just yesterday. I mean, it's.
Well, that guy turned out to be a big anti-Semite.
Oh, did he?
We're in this problem right now with garbage.
All right, are we?
We are done. Good Shabbos.